I think something that I've really had to work on in my personal and professional life is listening. And listening is a skill. Listening is a muscle memory. 10, 15 episodes of the podcast, some of the feedback that I got from really trusted friends and former colleagues was, Adam, you're talking over your guests. You're not listening to what they're saying. And instead, you're just going down your own path, your own agenda of your bullet points on your show that you want to get to. And once I listened to that feedback and let it sink in, that's when the show changed, and I was able to listen to the guest and be able to go off script. If the guest is saying something interesting, to synthesize it and have a follow-up line of questions that made for a more interesting show. And I started to apply that more to my everyday life from that learning lesson from the podcast early days, and now it's a game changer. I mean, listening is a huge game changer, and it's made me a better leader.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Few with me, Boo, and my exceptionally good friend with it's got a bit of green there, mate. It looks like a bit of a rebrand going on there, Shawnee.
Mate, just went through a bit of a rebrand, very strategically. It took about 12 months to create it. New messaging, new branding, colours, the flag up here, obviously, that we can see if you're watching this online. It's definitely a very different delivery.
And you're looking pretty chiseled too, mate. I have to say, you've been working out. Like you're looking like under the nose, very Arnie at the moment.
That's fucking doubtful, but anyway, I'll say thank you. It's just better habits, like going through, as I said, rebrand. There's been a lot of that, I think, outside the business as well, in I suppose reinvention of myself and really just leveling up over the last 6 to 12 months, as you would have seen. But yeah, I love it. It's represented in the new brand, the new colours, the new messaging. All of that, so really enjoying the.
That's awesome, mate. We'll have to get you on the podcast at some stage.
Yeah, great. That sounds like a good idea.
Hey, I'm really excited about today's guest. It's always a great opportunity for us to leave our small little island over here and venture over to our very, very big brother in the US of A there. And today's guest is a bit of a beast in the advertising and marketing world. He's survived the cut and thrust of the ad marketing in New York City, and has, like many of our guests here on The Few, he's made that jump into his own world. He's creating his own brand. He's creating a great footprint for himself. So with no further ado, let's introduce our guest today, Adam Posner, call sign Pos. G'day, Pos. How are you, mate? Thanks for joining Sean and I on The Few.
Welcome, Adam.
Gentlemen, I first of all, thank you for having me. But you know how hard it is as a podcast host to sit here and watch you two guys banter and not say a word and not be able to just jump in and talk smack like,
That's
how do you not talk about Sean's hair? I mean, it's. I got a haircut today just for you guys. I said, you know what? I'm going down under, and look at that. That's why he keeps a hat on there. So, gentlemen,
look at that, mate. This is 14 weeks of lockdown.
Not allowed to get a haircut.
Lockdown locks. We call those lockdown locks, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Happy to be here, guys. And good evening. Good evening to me, and good morning to you.
Great stuff. Now, what I wanted to do, Adam, is as part of the Few, it's really about people who have taken their journey of life and found a way to do what they really love and what they're passionate about. And clearly, podcasting is one of those things. As I said, I kept you on mute until we gave you an opportunity to speak, just in case you jumped
Smart
in.
Man.
Actually, no, I didn't. But I should have. But anyway, so we'd love to hear a little bit of the backstory. Like, where did you start off in, I suppose, in your career? But then obviously you're now into the talent space. But I hear that was a bit of a very different experience when you started out.
And having the best nickname to launch a podcast as well.
It worked out well. So first and foremost, again, thank you guys for having me so much. Happy to meet you, Sean. Boo, I had on the podcast a few weeks back. That should be airing soon. Really excited to share that. And I love that's the beauty of everything that we do here in this digital world, that we could connect like this and create Absolutely. A platform, a canvas for us to have amazing conversations and share knowledge and our crazy story. So as I like to say here, long story long, but I'll keep it short for you guys. Born and raised New Yorker, something I take a ton of pride in. I love my city. Born here, born in Brooklyn, raised out in the burbs after that. I knew since college I always had this kind of business marketing, entrepreneurial bug. And that's what I did right after university. And I spent 15 years working in advertising and marketing here in New York City in account management, digital strategy, social strategy, really growing up with the internet, growing up with Facebook and MySpace and all that stuff before it is now. I worked for a number of different advertising agencies. I worked B2B, B2C. I worked brand side, as we like to call it, at a satellite radio company called SiriusXM. Not sure if you guys are familiar, home of the great Howard Stern here in New York. I worked for SiriusXM for 5 years in direct-to-consumer marketing. So I really have a broad background in all aspects of marketing, B2B, B2C, online, offline, direct-to-consumer, e-commerce. And then after Sirius, I went over to another little company called American Express Consumer Credit Cards. Did that for a couple of years before returning to Adland, a place that really was a calling for me. And I found myself working at what I thought was my forever job, working for the great Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know how big Gary V is down under over there, but Gary V is tremendous.
Infamous, like everywhere else.
Infamous.
Made his way here, yeah.
Yeah, he's been down there a couple of times. He even did a trip a couple of years back where he did it in like 24 hours, like some crazy 48-hour back and forth trip. But found myself
I had the
working
opportunity I spoke on stage alongside Gary in
right, a couple of years ago.
Where was it? In LA. No, it was in Las Vegas, actually. That was about 5 years ago. So I had a good 20 minutes up at the back of the room to chat to him. So
he's a good dude.
Good guy.
So just to kind of wrap the story up so we could get the show on the road here, I was working for Gary Vee, and I thought it was my forever job. I thought it was the grass was greener on the other side, but it wasn't. And I knew almost immediately because for two reasons. One, on their side, I really truly don't feel like I was set up for success, but I really need to take ownership of my inability, 6-7 months in, to really perform at the level and what they needed me to do. I just, self-awareness, looking in the mirror for a moment. I didn't do what I was hired for. And ultimately I lost my job. I was 35 at the time. And that was a real kick in the ass. After doing what I thought was my career and my path that I set out on, it was that real kick in the face moment where I had to take a step back and say, am I good at this? Is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And I sat there with Gary on the day I got let go. Gary and I had a good relationship. And we sat there for about an hour. And the first thing he said to me is like, listen, don't let this be a reflection of who you are. He's like, this just didn't work out. The timing wasn't right. It just wasn't the right situation from you. It's not because you're not smart. It's not because people don't like you. It just wasn't the right time and place. But unfortunately, it's just not working out here. And it's best that we part ways. But he said something to me that stuck with me forever. He said, you need to stop focusing on all those things that you suck at and double down on your strengths. Because so many times in our past, people are telling you to work on things that you're not good at, work on things and be better. Of course, there's certain things in your life, like being a good human, learning how to tie a shoe. There's certain things you should work on. But when you think about it from a career perspective, if I've been doing something for 15, 16 years and I'm really not at a level that I should be at, maybe it's time to look elsewhere and think about those things that I really am good at. I'm good at this, what we're doing now. I'm good at connecting. And most importantly, I'm good at building relationships, right? Because that's really what my superpower is. I'm a connector. I'm a conduit. And that's what I do best. So Gary and I start talking, and he's like, well, what do you think you could do? What else have you been thinking about? And I said, well, Gary, one of my good friends is a recruiter in finance. And before I could finish my frickin' sentence, Gary says to me, dude, you would be a kick-ass recruiter. So I went out, and I didn't just jump right into recruiting. I thought about it for a bit. But let me tell you guys about, if you have a quick second, there was a moment a couple days later after, I walked out the door. I went to a bar at 11 o'clock in the morning in New York, tied one on. I had to. It's super cliche, right? Like I had to.
Did you have a soundtrack running as you were walking there?
And it was cold. It was an April day. And here's the fucked up thing. It was April 1st, and April 1st is April Fool's Day. I don't know if you guys celebrate April Fool's Day.
Yeah.
And so for me, April Fool's Day is always the day that the joke was on me. Kind of in a weird kind of movie set, if you want to do it there.
Yeah, that's cool.
But my wife is working, the law firm she was working at the time was only about five blocks away up Park Avenue here in New York City. I walked outside, I called her, had the conversation, which was terrible. That's a whole other podcast. And she's like, well, why don't you come up to my office? And I said, I'll be there in about an hour. I have a stop to make. And I went to the bar, and cliche, I tied one on. Literally, I think it was me and some old dude at the end of the bar, and he looked over, he's like, would you get fired? I'm like, what? How the fuck? How'd you know that? He's like, no one comes into a bar unless you're an alcoholic. At 11:30 in the morning, he's like, you don't look like a boozer. I'm like, oh, all right, that's cool. But it was a couple days later where, after everything kind of sunk in, and I was like, am I really not going to be working in advertising and marketing anymore? Like, I really had that moment when I was like, is this it? Like, am I really going to take a deep breath and start a new profession, which I have no idea about, at 35, like switching careers. That was a tough pill to swallow. I mean, I had moments of thinking about, maybe, and no knock on anybody that works at Home Depot or Best Buy, but I like to work with my hands. Maybe I should go to Home Depot and go down the management track there and run a Home Depot, or I'm into electronics. Maybe I should go to Best Buy and maybe that's a career path for me. Maybe I should drive an Uber. I don't know what I should do, but I need to support my family. We just bought a house. We moved out of the city to the burbs. Big bills coming down the pipe. But what I did was I said, you know what? Please interrupt. That's your job. I was waiting for it.
Just at that moment, when you're talking about, Best Buy, Costco, got to do something, right? It's that moment in life, isn't it, where there's a zero parachute, yeah, and particularly if you're the sort of personality that goes all in on your career, yeah. Did you find and what we've sort of seen here on The Few, and I've certainly observed in life, is it's at that moment we find this deep reserve of energy and creativity that we never really harnessed before because of that like absolute peak stress. Did that happen to you?
Boo, the treasures are in your shit pit. The treasures are at your lowest. The treasures are going to be when you're at the bottom of that well and you think there's no way of climbing up. And that was my bottom for me. And I'm going to tell you, I remember it. I'm in my bedroom. It was a bright April day. The sun was coming through and the day was perfect, but I wasn't. And I literally, for the first time in my life, I said, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Not so much my family, my kids and everything, but my career, my vocation. Like, who am I? Like, is this defining me? And I had that kind of breakthrough moment where I was like, no, I'm gonna use this opportunity. I'm gonna change it. And that's when I always talk about, and if anybody listens to my podcast, I talk about the word tenacity. And we all have it in us. It's some way or another. Some people have it here. Some people have it there. Some people have it here, but you don't know how to pull it up. And it was that moment when I was in my bedroom, I said, no, I'm going to do this. I need to support my family. I need to make the best of this situation here and give this thing a shot. And that's when I went out and I reached out. I remember it was a couple of days, over a course of a couple of days, I reached out to every recruiter that I knew, every recruiter that my friends connected me with. And I went on a 2-week listening tour and I connected with them and I asked them to, give me 15, 20 minutes, tell me about the industry, everything I could learn about it. And it was during that time when I landed my first gig at Onward Search, my first recruiting agency that believed in me. That was a type of recruiting agency that wasn't smile and dial all day long, but understood the value that I was bringing in the relationships, and
Adam,
I was able to align with a mentor that taught me.
Adam, can I ask you a question?
That's your job.
But did you believe in you first?
I did.
Yeah.
Well, I believed in me, and that was a tough one, man, because there was many moments during that time when I won't say that I contemplated, hurting myself or going as far as even, suicide or anything like that. But there was some really, really dark moments when I questioned everything about who I am. I questioned my value. I questioned my ability. Like I really was, that was the lowest point of my life. I questioned my ability. It was dark, man. That was some shitty times. And the worst part about it was that I was a shitty person to my friends and my family during that time. And they probably said to themselves, hey, Adam's going through a lot right now. Just deal with it. But that's not an excuse. You never want to be like that. And that hurt me even more that I was acting like that to the people I loved and cared about.
It sounds very familiar, Adam. I mean, I was about 35, I think 35 or 36. And I'd had businesses since 1999, I think it was, until that was, nearly 10, 11 years ago now. And we'd had the fallout following the GFC, and that had effectively taken the kneecaps out of my group of businesses. And we'd gone from approaching 8 figures to barely 7 figures, and went from a giant, very kind of largish small business, I suppose, medium-sized business. We shrunk back down, and I'm just going, all 20 plus years of my working career, what have I got to show for it? A big freaking debt. And this thing happened to me, and feeling like that victim. And a good friend and mentor of mine said, do you feel like you're at rock bottom? And I said, absolutely. I said, I just feel like throwing it all in and going and get a job, or, which has got, got a safety net. And not that I ever would, but, they feel that. And he said, just remember that rock bottom is the most solid foundation you can build on. I was just like, ooh,
right. That's a good one. I got to write that down.
Because he said, you can't go down any further. So
where are you going to go from here?
So I did. I started building. That's when I shifted my own career into this space, into the business education space, and
I love it.
Speaking and podcasting. And I'd never done it before. It was a completely different industry. But as you said, when you go through that phase, and yes, I was a prick to other people around me. There's no excuse. It's not okay. It was because I was punishing myself, but I was also punishing others. But it's that thing of when you sometimes to reset, you need to have your cage rattled really, really crazy for you to actually stop doing what you're doing, stop thinking what you're thinking, and go.
It's a hard thing to do. I think when you're in that mindset, you have awareness that you're not your best self around other people, and I think this is where you start to see the limits of the self-help movement when people talk about think positive, move forward, find
manifest
purpose.
your shit.
Yeah, but there is still this moment where the only thing that works is tenacity, resilience. You just got to grind through, and you just are not going to be your best self to anyone.
You can't learn that. You have to unlock it. You have to unlock it yourself. You have to be the one to do that. No self-help book is going to tell you. Situational. It's situational.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's situational. It's funny, and I look back on it now.
There you go. Absolutely.
You look back on it like 6-7 years later. I mean, that was the moment, to your point, Sean, where literally that was the pivot moment of my life and my career where I haven't looked back. I had Gary on my show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about confidence, and I said to him, it was that moment when everything changed for me for the better. Yes, I went through those struggles of starting a new profession, and there was a learning curve, learning how to be a recruiter, learning how to go from a salary, a very nice 6-figure salary, to a draw, to a 40,000 draw, and learning what it was like to live on commission. But I think that's another huge piece too. Once I had to go from a salary to a commission where I eat what I kill and I have to hunt, that brought out something else in me from the drive perspective. And that brought out something that I've always had inside of me and just compounded exponentially from a mindset. The hunter mindset.
There's nothing like it. That ability to, that's the great thing about having family as well. I mean, you talk about purpose. When you got to feed that family, something primal starts to happen inside you. It doesn't feel good. It's high stress. You don't sleep well, but something comes out of you, and you always find the business. Something always happens.
You're putting balls in play. You're putting balls in play. You're throwing things out there, out into the universe, and you know what? It's a boomerang. You throw it out, and it's going to come back to you one way or another. It may take a long time for that motherfucker to come back to you, right? But you're going to throw it out there, and some come back to you sooner than later. But when you put things out into the universe, energy, vibes, passion, relationship, it's going to come back to you, and you have to have faith, and you have to believe in karma, because that's real.
The ability to think out of that hole, the ability to do positive things rather than think positive things. I mean, how important was, and those imperfect first actions, because no doubt your first podcast wasn't your best podcast, right? No, so what was it about? What did you learn from that you could share in terms of rebuilding and going from a zero start up to creating that momentum?
And I might just add one other element to that question, if I can, is I think some people think it's like this magical epiphany moment that suddenly you're out of this hole, and it
was a long time.
I just want to add that to the question.
Yeah, it was a journey, and it was a staircase up. It wasn't just a straight line. It was a staircase up, and within that, there was failures. There was falling on my face. There was learning the business. I mean, I went into a new industry. I mean, I accelerated quickly in the recruitment industry because I had a wind at my sail. I didn't go in as a complete rookie. I knew the concept of recruiting. I had relationships already built. I had a Rolodex. I knew the advertising industry that I recruit for, which was great. And then it was time 4 years ago when I went out and launched my own business, when I said, screw it, I'm done working for other people. That's when everything really, elevated and things really took off. But there was a ton of stumbling blocks along the way. And then obviously every single day that you fail, if you're going to fail, you fail hard, you recover, you learn your lesson, and you move forward there. It's all about resiliency. But when it comes to the podcast, man, I mean, where do you even start with podcasting? I mean, podcasting is my sixth gear. And I told you, Boo, about this too. Like when I went out and said, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast. And you know why I said I wanted to start a podcast? And I'm going to be freaking straight up, because I heard other podcasts out there and I'm like, they suck. I could do it better. Like verbatim. I listened to somebody's show and they were getting a decent amount of downloads. And I'm like, this show sucks. They're a shitty host. They're not that good. They have no flow. They don't know how to ask questions. And I went to my Rolodex and I said, look, I have a great group of people here. how do I create something where I could showcase all these relationships and amazing folks that are going to share wisdom with the world? Now it's February 2019, and almost 200 episodes later, I went from recording on Zoom in a small conference room in an office building I was renting at, to now having my own office with thousands of dollars of equipment here in 2.5 years. I look at that, I'm like a physical manifestation of success, which I haven't seen in my life before.
I hope you're not trying to say something about shitty podcasts or anything, but hey, let's just skip that one.
I won't call out names here.
But it's a great segue into you just mentioned the S word, mate, and I think one of the challenges with life for a lot of people is feeling success, and the only way people feel success is if they have this continuous promotion, get to the top of the tree in a comfortable life, maintain forward momentum always until some magic happens. But like, again, many people on the few, you've obviously decided to create your own success, your own version of it.
There's something I wanted to kind of double back on, but it applies to what we're talking about right now, is the concept of action over perfection. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap where they're trying to perfect something or do something great. And I look back to my first podcast, it was literally recorded on Zoom and the production value was nothing. But I put it out there. I didn't wait till it was perfect. I didn't edit the crap out of it. And I just kept going and building and improving it every single time, which was something in my past that maybe I never did. That wasn't like a mindset that I had. And for me, success is a moving target. Success for me is consistent improvement. That's how I measure success. It's not a goal line. It's not a finish line. It's just consistently improving. If I know every single day that I'm improving, that I'm doing better, I see the business building, I see more relationships happening, the quality of my product, the quality of my relationships, the quality of my conversation. For me, that is what success is. That I could look back and say, am I happy with what I'm building here? Am I happy with my life? Am I happy with my relationships? Am I healthy? The people around me healthy and feeling good? That's success.
So you're saying, Adam, as what I'm hearing is, success is a state of being, not a state of doing. So you're feeling and living success rather than trying to achieve it by the attainment of something, or when I get here, or once I've done that, then I'll be successful. Yeah,
but with one caveat, I'm not inherently materialistic, and I'm not a car guy. But I really want a badass Range Rover. For me, that'll be pretty successful. I'm not a car guy, but the one car, I look at it, like this guy down the block has one with like the matte black finish on it. It's badass, like all blacked out with the black finish. And it's like, he rolls down the street to the coffee shop. I'm like, I know it's him. And I see that car, I'm like,
hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's motivation. It's motivation.
Hey, Sean, interesting here, and I just had a bit of a aha moment, was the words that Adam used. And I've never heard anyone on our podcast say, I want to get ahead. I want to be in front. Like it's a race. And Adam just said it there. It's about improving all the time. And you worked in Adland, Adam. I mean, how acceptable is Adland if you walked up one day and said, here's something I've roughed in together. Yeah, it's not perfect. Hey, let's just have a go. Compared to you living your own success where you can actually do that and evolve and control that creative process. Like, really successful people succeed from improvement. They don't succeed by getting ahead.
No. They actually people actually improve by bettering the people around them. Surrounding everybody around you, you lift each other up, right? And rising tide lifts all. And I really truly believe in that. And I help everyone personally, professionally. I'm a big believer in, Simon Sinek talks about your why, your North Star. And I talk about my North Star on my podcast too, as my compass, as my focal point. But one of the things that I've really latched onto and really means a lot to me is your how you go about living, how you go about your relationships. How do you live every day? And that comes down to something Gary Vee says all the time, doing the right thing all the time is the right thing, is the only way. How you live your life. And I think that's, critically important. And it goes back to Adland. And one of the things I hated about it, and it's weird to say it, but it was a grimy business, because recruiting there's parts of recruiting that are a terrible, slimy business. I mean, I moved away from that element of recruiting. But you go back to Adland and it was cutthroat. It was cutthroat. I mean, I was talking to you guys before air. There was a point that really hit home of why I hated Adland. I was a number of years back, I was at a great agency. It was literally my favorite advertising job I've ever had because of the people I worked with and the work that I was doing. I was doing meaningful work with people I enjoyed doing it with. And one of our clients, they moved some numbers around in the budget. They decided to cut the portion of work that our company was supporting, and 25 of us got let go a week before Christmas. They couldn't even wait till after the holidays.
That's brutal.
So what would that have cost payroll-wise for another 2 weeks, just so people didn't have to have that shitty feeling around the holidays and New Year's? And that really, like, to this day, I've not gotten over that. And I know who's responsible for that. I know where the decisions were made. And, like, not that I hold grudges, but I know. We know everything, man.
Yeah, it's and look,
you got to move on.
I've recently made a good friend who was like a creative director at BBDO and very, very ingrained in ad world from a very young age. He's in his 50s now. And talking to him and hearing it from you, he just said ad world is absolutely brutal. Why is it? Why is that industry the way it is?
Because we're beholden to the client. We're beholden to the client's budgets,
and
to their decisions.
Dreams? Are you selling?
You're selling dreams. Like, how is this? How am I marketing this bottle of water? If this doesn't make Dasani Pepsi 1.01 cents more in their stock or whatever, they're going to dump the whole campaign. It's brutal. It's brutal. It's also subjective. Creative is subjective. Unless you're running tests in market and saying there's a direct correlation between this commercial on TV and exactly the number of sales, it's completely subjective. And when it comes down to opinions, that's where it's going to be contentious. It's opinions and it's BS, man. And I'm glad I'm out of it.
What was the biggest lesson you took away from that space? What was the biggest life lesson?
Don't trust anybody, no. But be careful with your heart. And I mean that from a business perspective, not on the personal side. We all hear that too. Be careful of your heart. And I mean that in business too. Never get so emotionally attached to something in business. Well, until now. But when you're working for somebody else, always remember that it's somebody else's business. It's somebody else's company. And don't let your heart get attached to it, because you'll be broken like that. And they'll stomp on it and not give a shit.
That's a really interesting perspective as well, because there's a big movement towards purpose. And Sean, with your community, you talk a lot about, purpose and commitment and consistency, which is quite easy when you own a business and it's your business, right? It's easier to connect there. But when you're in a big business or you've got employees, right, that don't really care, or they might line up to your purpose to some degree, but it's not their purpose. How do you do that? Because what you're saying there is like, it's counterculture. Don't keep your heart safe. Whereas, cultural norm now is all about invest your full self into the organization. Line up you need to do purposeful work. Like, that's an interesting.
There's a balance there, right? Like I speak to a lot of candidates, recruiters, and they want to do cause marketing, social good, and there's one thing that's taking it to a limit, saying, I only want to work at a company, maybe it's an NPO, NGO, maybe it's a non-for-profit company that's doing social causes, social goods. That's great. That's following your passion. But always remember at the end of the day that it's not your company, right? So you could attach yourself and drive your passion to a certain point. And maybe I'm being cynical because my heart's been stomped on and I've had some terrible hurt and losses in business. But what I'm trying to tell people is put your all out there, but just be mindful. Right? Like, just be mindful at the end of the day, but not till now. And this brought up an interesting point. So you said, so now I have my own company and I have people working for me full time. At the end of the day, no one's going to care more about your company than yourself. But how do you ensure that the people that work for you care as much as possible? And that's what I'm learning right now. I have a great guy, Kevin, that works for me. And the way I want him to believe in me as much as I believe in him. And that's the way I got brought up by some of my great mentors. I believe in him. I invest in him emotionally. I invest in him, teaching him. And I think that's really what culture and value is, that I care about him.
How important have mentors been on your journey?
They've been everything. And I've created a tribe of mentors around me. And I've done that through careful curation of aligning myself with folks who I see them in their career trajectory, and it may not be the exact path I want to go, but I deeply admire how they got there and what they did to get there and who they are as a person. And I learn from them. Some of them are from afar. We take like a Gary Vee, and then some of them are close. Some of them are far through osmosis, but I still have connections with them. And then there are the people that are really close to me that are my close tribe of mentors. That the part that I struggle with mentorship, I'm curious to you guys, is a mentee, how do you give value back to the mentor? And what I've learned through mentoring is it's that feeling of giving that you can't create.
It's that I find it too. I mean, that's what I do. I have a group of 100 businesses where I mentor them. And for me, the biggest thing that fills my cup is the fact that I'm taking all of this bullshit that I experience, the punches in the guts, the GFCs, the heart being stomped on, all the rest of it, all that stuff. And it's like, why did I go through that if I can't teach somebody else how not to go through it as heavily or as, for as long as I did, and it's one of those things about, teaching people and mentoring others is so rewarding. It's so much bigger than myself. And I love Dan Pink's book Drive, where he talks about the three human drivers. It's autonomy, the ability to feel in control of your own destiny in some way. Mastery, which is being able to learn and grow and be better tomorrow than you were today, a better version of yourself. And purpose, which is being part of something bigger than yourself. And going from having my head up the backside of many businesses that were growing and were successful and they sold widgets and things and whatever they did, I had no interest in what they were selling. And eventually it was like, I don't want to grow businesses, I want to grow people. And I found that was very much the case. And Boo, you'd know this too, is that I think every single person we've had on this podcast who is out there living their purpose, their passion, enjoying what they're doing, driving their own success, all that sort of stuff, they are the type of people that have surrounded themselves by other great people, that they've got mentors, but they're also willing to share and be generous with others.
It's a tremendous observation. And another aha moment that I had recently was, I've never I've had people underneath me when I was, earlier in my career. And then in the last 4 years while I was learning up the ropes in recruiting and launching my own business, I didn't have anyone underneath me. And now that I have a protege, I'm finally coming into my own as a people leader. And I'm taking parts of all the good that I've learned from some amazing mentors in my life, but I'm also doing something, I'm being very mindful of a lot of those shitty bosses that I had and trying to be very mindful of not repeating those mistakes. I've caught myself. And the other piece that's kind of hard for me too as a business owner is scaling. And I'm learning how to scale, and you guys know this, is being able to relinquish trust and control. Saying something that I do all the time, I'm going to give this up and let somebody else do it. And I know it may not be exactly the way I do it or to the exact level I want, but you know what? I need to do this so they could grow. And that's been a big lesson for me. It's how I scale up as a business owner, is to relinquish trust and give others the ability, to take the ball and run with it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge for small business owners and startups and growth is that the founder becomes the limiting factor in their, because they don't do that, because they don't empower the team. You can live 400 scenarios of your business in one day in your own mind, but to try and align everyone else behind those 400 things, you've got to distill that down to one thing at a time. And I think that's what I, more and more as I study leadership, you look at the profound leaders, they really just rallied around one thing, and they drive the narrative back to that one thing. And I think I guess the downside of it at the moment is everyone has we're getting more extreme one thing, so we're seeing a gravitation away towards that. Whereas the one thing we probably all need to focus around is empathy. Just be a little bit forgiving of everyone. And because you work with people, Adam, and we're moving into a digital era, so one of the things I'm really interested to hear about is where do people fit in to the digital world?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one during the pandemic here with everything going remote. We're losing that personal touch. I mean, we're moving so rapidly and forced into this era of non-personal, personal communications. It's crazy. We're all living in silos. We're all living in these square boxes here, and we're losing that human contact. And that hurts me. That really hurts me inside because I love being in an office. I'm not saying that's for everybody, and I'm not going to go off on a rant here of why being in an office for at least part of the time is good for human beings, but we're not meant to live in these silos. And I'm really concerned about how we are devolving, not evolving as humans as far as communication.
I think
where
it's
we're relying on
Adam.
these hacks and these shortcuts. It's connection. We're missing connection.
That's one of our core fundamental, traits as a human is that we
Physical
have a need
contact.
for connection.
We're going to look back on this time. It's going to be harmful. And you think about it, how's this affecting the younger generations, our kids? Thank God my kids are back at school. But so many are not, and we're not meant to live like this in silos. So where do people fit in? And that's a tough one, right? Fitting in. I never really liked the term culture fit. That was one of my big kind of thorns in my side when I would talk to a company and onboarding and a new client and we want to look for people who are culture fit. Well, what the hell does that mean? You're looking for people that look, act, and sound like you? I say, no way. What you really want is to create a company that's a quilt. And if you think about a quilt, I don't know if your grandmother made quilts back in the day, but quilts are made up of many different fabrics, different textiles, different colors, different materials. And when you put them all together, some are thin, some are thicker, different colors, different strings. But when you put them all together, a couple things happen. They become a lot stronger together. And when you pull back the camera, it creates this beautiful picture. And that's what a company should look like. It should look like a quilt and not a comforter. That's a new one. I'm going to write that down.
It's a good analogy because when you have that, you focus and work harder on the joins, on the connections. You build more robust relationships between them rather than just have this vanilla type of fabric which can tear easily. And I think that is the biggest. I think in the digital age, especially now that information is all pervading, the interconnectiveness and context is where you have to see a new future and where people have to play the role.
So think about the word diversity. And I think diversity is kind of just talk about diversity for a moment. I think the most important diversity within a company is diversity of mindset, diversity of perspective, diversity of thought. I mean, of course you want diversity of color, sexual orientation, and all that kind of good stuff too, but it's diversity of mindset. When you say culture fit, you're saying everyone should think and act the same. What value you bring into your clients? Zero perspective.
As you say, the reference is not a great one. Where I see it is you need people that are aligned from a values perspective because they'll fit in with the quilt analogy, right? They'll fit in with that. But you don't want them, as you said, Boo, to be vanilla, all the same, minions all kind of wandering along doing the same thing. You need that uniqueness, that different perspective, the different backgrounds, the different experiences to really throw, I use the fruit salad analogy. If someone comes and goes with an idea and says banana, which you're not thinking about, and then someone goes an apple, and someone says an orange, and someone goes, hang on, what about a fruit salad? Whereas you've got everyone who just thinks about bananas. Well, you're never going to get to this new idea, this new concept of something different because of those different perspectives. And I liken it to a process we do in our inner circle group every quarter. We do one of the days of our 3-day events is a mastermind process, and you have about 6 businesses around a table, all working on one business's biggest issue or opportunity. And the kinds of information and ideas and creativity that comes from that, I think is the same. You've got to look at that within your team. You're having a team meeting of some kind. You want that mastermind kind of feel of different backgrounds and input. It's such a powerful, powerful thing.
Oh, absolutely, right. And you want to have those perspectives. And the problem from a leadership is when the leader tries to trump that conversation with their own thoughts, saying, "This is the final, this is the final decision." Then it's coming from me.
Yeah, I'd say this is not a dictatorship, but I'm doing it my way.
Absolutely.
How would you describe yourself as a leader, Adam, to your team now?
I think that I want to be the type of leader that leads with compassion, that leads with an open heart, that leads with empathy, and that listens. I think something that I've really had to work on in my personal and professional life is listening. And listening is a skill. Listening is a muscle memory. And I'll even kind of give you an example of that. So when my first, I'd say, 10, 15 episodes of the podcast, some of the feedback that I got from really trusted friends and former colleagues was, Adam, you're talking over your guests. You're not listening to what they're saying. And instead, you're just going down your own path, your own agenda of your bullet points on your show that you want to get to. And once I listened to that feedback and let it sink in, that's when the show changed. And I was able to listen to the guest and be able to go off script. If the guest is saying something interesting, to synthesize it and have a follow-up line of questions that made for a more interesting show. And I started to apply that more to my everyday life from that learning lesson from the podcast early days. And now it's a game changer. I mean, listening is a huge game changer, and it's made me a better leader. And keeping my ear to the ground, and I want to be known as a leader that trusts my employees. You want to be the type of leader that people want to work for. And in turn, I want to be the type of leader that works for my employees. That's the dynamic that you want.
Yeah, it's funny with leadership, isn't it? Because it's so, you think you are a certain type of leader and you have a particular idea, and then something happens and you're like, wow, you know what? I can do a much better job here, or I think an area where I'm really interested in humanity is perceptions, right? This instantaneous, biased viewpoint we have on everything that we can't control, and that
unconscious bias.
Yeah, and that then triggers the conscious side of our thoughts, and reading into this concept of situational awareness. You have these 8 phases of thought, and the first one being perception. I think once you realize you are able to put a blocker in there and quickly say, okay, well, is that a perception to me, or is that really happening, or is that just a perception? And having the only way you can do that is having someone else on your team to either red team that or break that down. There's no other way. And that's for me in leadership is that as leaders, I think you got to find that wingman, that number 2, that even if it's your wife, your partner, whoever it is, just someone to just check those perceptions around what's influencing your decision making.
Yeah, you need to have Goose, right? You need to have your wingman there, because
I've got Goose. Look, you got my Shawnee. He's all over it.
Right? Like because we as leaders we have blinders on, and we can't see our blind spots. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to empower other folks on your team to have an open door or an open Zoom call to be able to say, hey, Adam, I don't know if you're noticing this. I don't know if you're seeing this in the marketplace. I don't know. Did you have that same thought and feeling and read between the lines from that last client meeting? And being able to create an environment where there's trust there, where Sean could come to me and say, Adam, like, I listened to what the client said there, and I just want to make sure that you and I are on the same page. If you create an environment like that, not only are you going to make each other better in that relationship better, you're going to make your company better.
That's a leadership skill and style that I think not enough people actually have. And I like the
it's
fact
humble, it's humility, right?
That's right, it does, absolutely. And I created a leadership definition. It's an exercise I use with all of my clients and members and stuff, get them to do it too. It's creating the actual definition of leadership. And I think it's about 7 years ago now I created mine, which is really stuck, which is I just describe myself, or who I aspire to be, as humble, authentic, and vulnerable. It's got nothing to do with dictatorship or telling people what to do or being bossy or whatever. But I like when you referenced before, you said someone gave you feedback about the podcast, that you were just running your questions and weren't actually listening, but you took it on board, and it changed not only that, but it actually changed how you show up. And I think that's where
trickle down.
People think leadership is a role that you play in your business or in an organization. If you work in an organization for somebody else, it's not. The leadership is the skin that you wear. It's who you are in every situation. And if we ensure we're embedding that and got the right reference point, we're going to end up showing up as that person people perceive as being the rock, that consistent, person. It doesn't matter whether you're at a barbecue or in the office, or you catch up with someone, you bump into them at a football game or baseball game or something, that you're the same person. You don't shift and waver in the breeze. It's really solid. So I love the fact that you've actually said that you've applied something you learnt from a feedback on the podcast, and you've carried it right through your entire life.
And that's not something I would have done 15 years ago. That was a very different Adam back then, who would just shrug it off and not take any constructive feedback. And I think another lesson that I learned from leaders that were great to me is the ability to provide air cover, right? To be able to cover your team's ass if they make a mistake, to stand up for them. The loyalty there. We're all on the same team. You're not going to throw them under the bus just for the sake of saving your business. I had an amazing leader who, one time I was presenting a piece of strategy, and she said to me, listen, when you're presenting anything, have a strong point of view, whether it's right or wrong, but stick to your convictions and be able to back it up. Let others decide, but I'm going to stick by you, and I'm going to back you up, and I'm going to have your ass. I'm going to cover your ass. And that stuck with me too. That loyalty, like I'm a very loyal friend. I mean, I'm almost loyal to a fault at times, but that's something I look for in my friends. It's something I look for in my personal relationships. And I think it goes a long way. The worst thing you could do to me is throw me under the bus. Like, you screw me once, we're done.
Yeah. That's where people's inability to deal with, that's their own shit. If they want to throw under the bus because they're not willing to take responsibility. They're not willing to own it.
You think there's an erosion though? Like there's an erosion in loyalty because we have this snap culture where it's like, well, I can just DM someone. I've got a new friend. I can just turn my dating apps on. I can find someone new. Like the digital world is really eroding some of those old-fashioned values. But maybe that'll create awareness and a flight back to them. I don't know.
I think we could hope.
You would see a recruiting rate, like you would just the churn of people now.
Oh my God!
Industry.
I mean, you want to rant here? I have seen more times in the last year of candidates accepting offers verbally, signing offer letters. We as recruiters stop the search because someone signed the offer letter, and then they have a 2-week period before they start. So we haven't sourced, we haven't done anything. The team is happy, someone's coming on board, and then a day before, sometimes day of, they call and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I have to turn this offer down because I've accepted another offer."
Yeah, that's frustrating.
So you mean to tell me this whole time you were still out there shopping yourself because this wasn't good enough? Do you know what you did to the team internally? This team here has been down 2 people for a year. These people are working twice as hard, 3 times as hard, and they get excited because they just hired somebody who's awesome, who's going to make their life easier because they don't have to do someone else's job who's vacant. Do you realize what you just did? Now, the other side of the coin is what people are saying is, listen, in this day and age, you got to look out for yourself. You got to do what's right for you at no matter what cost whatsoever. But loyalty's gone out the window. Then don't sign that offer letter. If you're not sure, if you're not 100%, don't sign that offer letter. Like, where is that finality? Where's your word bond? What happened to word is bond?
That's right. That's that. I was about to say exactly the same thing. It's like the word is my bond seems to not exist. It's like it's my bond
evaporated
until something better comes along, and then I'm going to throw it out the window. And it's like, where is that core integrity of you actually standing for something or believing in something or honoring your commitments? And I have, definitely seen that
eroded.
It had been eroded a lot in the employment market. I know, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US as it is here in Australia. We've got a very, very tight, skilled employment market, and
same.
We're seeing people, at the drop of a hat or the wind changes, they'll be just up and move to somewhere else because they get an extra $1 an hour or something, and it's just like, what? Like, really? You've got this incredible business with a great culture, and you've got this other one that is known for being a bunch of morons who don't do the right thing by people. But I get an extra $1 an hour, so I don't really care.
But I think you're still going to, these people are never going to end up in meaningful leadership roles. They're not going to end up changing the world, right? Because the people that
They're transactional.
Yeah, the people that do live that they've got that deeper level of commitment and performance. They so much of what you do, Adam, so much of what you do, Shawnee, and what I do is grind, right? So much of it is bits of detail that no one else really wants to do. And even when you hire people to do them, they don't want to do them, and you end up not doing it all the time, but you just end up polishing off a little bits of work here. So, this is the differentiator between the few. Is the ability to commit to the dark side as much as you do the light side, and accept that the yin and yang of life. You're not actually starting a business or going out on yourself to pursue rainbows. You're looking for the rainbow as well as digging the trenches.
And I think it's that
the journey is its success. And one thing I just want to add to that. Sorry, Sean. The one thing I want to add to that is when you talk about the few are the ones that really understand and believe that it's the marathon, that this is a long game, that this isn't transactional. I think one of the declines in society is this instant satisfaction, transactional, me all the time, instant gratification. And that's just a compounding effect, where if you're not getting something what you want, get out of it immediately and get the next thing, instead of understanding that it's a journey that you got to put in the work. And in this day and age, it's a few that succeed, the ones that are willing to put in the work, not take the shortcuts, not buy the Instagram followers for the instant fame and instant success. And that's what's showing. When you plant the seeds, the analogy I always give, I'm a farmer. I plant my seeds, I water my crops, I tend to my crops, make sure they're getting enough light and love. And when the time is right, I'm going to pick them, I'm going to harvest them, and they're going to be ripe, and they're going to be bounties, going to be plentiful. You can't just plant a seed and expect it to sprout up the next day. And the people that don't understand that are the ones that are going to lose. You may see what seems to be the optics of short-term success, but it's not. It's all smoke and mirrors.
That's right.
The real work
there's no substance. Time. There's no substance and no depth to it. It's like saying, right, I'm going to learn guitar, right? So you pick it up for 3 weeks to do guitar, and then I'm going to learn piano, and then I'm going to learn trumpet, and then I'm going to do something else. Yeah, you may have tried to learn all these things, but you're never going to master any. And the mastery of anything is about that grit, about that determination, about continuing to do something that you committed to doing, even when the motivation and excitement is past, right? And that's the difference.
Only the few. Only the few could do that. It's the pyramid. Only the few get to the top of the pyramid.
Yep.
I was reading was just reading some studies done by Clayton Christensen, who's was a pretty guruistic Harvard professor, and he was talking about successful product launches. Talk about ad agencies, and out of 30,000 product launches that he studied, only 1,500 successfully launched and made money. So 5%, right?
Small percent.
And then I was looking at another statistic that the digital world burns $2 trillion a year on mistakes and failed products. It's a mind-boggling number. But when working in big organizations around performance, one of the things that I always find baffling is we talk about goal setting, and you sit there and you talk about goal setting, and you come to the end of the quarter and you're like, well, how do we go? And no one achieved the goals. And they're like, no, great, it was really good. I said, but we didn't achieve our goals. And they're like, oh no, we reset them all. We brought all the goals down to equal where we got to. And it's like, what? Why? And they said, oh, that's what we always do because of all the external staff, and because sometimes. And I'm like, what's the point of them then? Like, well, like multi-billion-dollar organizations that somehow nail their 12-month strategy, and you're like, how did you do that? Oh, we just made some adjustments to the targets.
We just adjusted the KPIs.
Yeah, and you sit there and you
there's no participation trophy in life.
You just realize why that is a beige grey world where there is very little authenticity, because there's nothing to it. There's no real engagement with the heart. Everyone works really hard, but they're kind of lost as to what good looks like. So how do you do that, Adam? How do you keep stretching yourself? How do you not make those decisions and quit and just go, oh, well, you know what? I'm just not going to try as hard. Or
no, you hold yourself to a higher standard, and that's what you have to do. You have to. There's a balance. And I mean, it kind of goes back to action and perfection, where there's a balance. You want to keep things moving forward, but you want to keep yourself to a higher standard. Because in recruiting, how am I going to separate myself? I'm a dime a dozen. There's millions of people that do what I do out there, and the way I could do it is stay competitive, build good relationships, deliver a superior quality product, and deliver exceptional customer service. So if I keep those metrics in mind in everything that I do and aim to those and use that as my guardrails, and I'm going to be successful. Am I going to fall off sometimes? Am I going to have shitty days? Am I going to have days when I'm not on my A game? Of course. But if I always have front of mind to deliver a superior quality product and not take shortcuts, right? The naval commander, I forgot his name in the States here, he has a famous commencement speech where it's like, accomplish one thing a day, right? To make your bed every day. It's the first thing you could do, right? Like, have that accomplishment, get that win under your belt, and set this standard. I'm going to do something right. I'm going to do it the first time. I'm going to do it well, and that's going to set me off for the day, and keep everything in that direction. So you have to keep yourself and set to a higher standard. And that took a lot for me. I wasn't like that. Dude, early in my life, I would take so many shortcuts. I would half-ass everything, and it got me nowhere. But then when I started to put in the work and do things the right way, and said, I'm gonna build my show the right way, I'm gonna try things and try to up the standards here, deliver a better quality product, put in that extra time. That's when you see the real results. That's how you differentiate yourself out there.
Yeah, you can't shortcut success. And if someone wants to,
try.
Someone's on the pathway, they want
That's
to become
a
one
bumper
of the
sticker
few,
right there, mate. That's a big green bumper sticker.
Next to your honor roll. My kid's an honor roll.
So I want to ask a question. So you've obviously seen a lot, been around the traps, for different careers, different industries, different cultures, all the rest of it. If you could take one of your biggest lessons, or maybe more than one, but the biggest lessons that you've learnt in your life to date, and go back and teach it to a younger version of yourself, what would you teach yourself?
Oh man. Well, it goes back to what I was saying about listening, but it really comes down to structure and staying focused. And one of the biggest lessons I learned from a mentor of mine, my first mentor in recruiting, a gentleman by the name of Tom Hall, a very tactical piece of advice is plan your work and work your plan. Plan your work and work your plan. And I repeat that to myself, that mantra, every single morning when I turn on this computer. And the manifestation of that every day, I go through thousands of Post-its. I literally write down what I need to accomplish for the day. And it's not so much about scratching every one of these off, but I look down on it and I see that I'm going through and getting my things done that I set out to plan. And that's what keeps me focused. At the end of the day, if I take this notepad, there's days when I rip these up and I have 4 of them on my desk, and I can physically literally see the accomplishments. And there's other days when there's one line on there, but at least I know I made one effort, because curveballs are going to come. Life is going to come. But it's about staying focused, and that's something I didn't always have in my life. but I do now. So repeat that mantra: plan your work your plan. Works backwards too. Work your plan your work. Works both ways.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. Big part of what we teach. And I use a little whiteboard for mine. Instead of post-it notes, I just put it on the whiteboard. I have a lot of satisfaction in rubbing it off.
What?
I've got all the technology
What are you
we
talking
use.
about?
We've got ClickUp. We've got a whole planning, and execution framework that we use. All the digital stuff, but it's very interesting. And maybe I'm showing my age or something, but writing something down. There's something about writing it down, and then
it's a physical act of it that connects to your brain.
It off. It is. And
I got my whiteboard.
There's no substitute for getting off digital now. I think more than ever. You've got to have your little bits of paper, and what are you going to talk about, and nothing's going to
my show notes
halfway through that.
Yeah, I mean, for my podcast, I print out all my show notes, and because I need to see it in front of me. There's certain things that have to be analog. There's certain things that have to be in front of me analog because it triggers a different part. Our brains are so wired digitally that in order for you to break through that pattern and for something to sink in, you have to figure out how to break it. So if everything I have in my life is digital and I'm notes in my iPhone section, if I want something to really resonate and be important, I have to physically write it down to make the difference. So hack your life. Yeah. Figure out those hacks.
Detached. I think you feel detached if you try and put everything digitally. That's why whiteboards, getting on a whiteboard and brainstorming stuff and or flip chart paper or whatever it is such a powerful creative tool that I think, particularly younger generation who have been exposed to digital all their lives, you've got to get the hell off it sometimes and actually go back to
my son can't even
visceral experience, a physical experience.
He writes like what resembles letters, and you just sit there. He's like 15. It's like, mate, he's like, I don't write, Dad. Hey, Adam, here's what I want to ask you. I've just started working with Publicis Group. Yeah, they reached out from New York, the head of talent, and they said, "Hey, we want to talk about performance." I delivered a deep performance keynote there, and one of the key elements of that is the rule of threes. Right? Don't do more than 3 things a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year. That it was interesting in the ad world. They're like, "How could you possibly do that?" They're like, I have to do 100 things every day. And they're like, how do you do it? It's like, well, I just write it down on a piece of paper. And it was like what about what productivity tool do you use? I'm like, well, I don't.
My brain.
I just, yeah. I just write, I figure it out.
Yeah, I use the old noggin. I mean, that's an important one too. I think in this digital age, we're always on, we're always accessible. You have to figure out how to literally and metaphorically, you have to figure out how to block and tackle your day. Otherwise, you're going to be scatterbrained and distracted. You have to figure out focus. I'm going to use this time for that. Shut windows down. Shut notifications off. That's how you remain productive. You only get tactical about it.
I'm a very much an anti-notification person. It's one of the biggest distractions you'll ever freaking have, and
turn them all off. Pretty much.
Remove them.
The only notifications I have on my phone are sports scores. I'm serious.
Phone number. Yeah, if your kids ring.
That's it.
Awesome, Adam. Mate, that's been super insightful, mate. We've been able to reach. We're still in lockdown. Why don't we just quickly close out? What the hell's going on over there in terms of COVID? We have to have these conversations because one day it'll be over. We need to like have a little time capsule of what life was like in COVID.
I got to tell you something right now. I'm you guys are back to the future because you're in the future. You're a day ahead of me. But today it's still Wednesday here in New York, Wednesday evening. You guys are like Thursday morning, right? Something like that, right? It's all back to the future thing. I'm not even shitting you. It's like nothing is wrong here in Long Island, except for the fact that the kids are wearing masks. And occasionally I get an email, not occasionally, every day I get an email that there's a COVID case in the school. And if the classroom it gets quarantined and they figure it out. But we're living life and I'm kind of okay with it. I understand what COVID means to get it. We're vaccinated and we're really trying to live our life and go on. Strip away the politics of it. Just remember it from a science perspective. Really think about what this means. You want to protect your elderly. You want to protect the people that are susceptible. You want people around you to get vaccinated. Be smart. Take care of each other. Make smart decisions. Right? Like it's still kind of warm here. Like we try to eat outside. I'm not going inside movie theaters. Maybe we'll eat inside a restaurant, but we're really just trying to live life. And I think that's the mindset you have to take, in my opinion, because otherwise we're just going to live the rest of our lives paranoid, and that's not the way I want to live. Or I don't want my kids to think that's the norm. My kids are at this malleable age. I don't want that.
Yeah, that's a good point, mate.
I hope you guys get back to that point too. I was envious when you guys, literally, I remember they showed an Aussie football game in the middle of the pandemic here when we were all in freaking lockdown. I'm like, that's a full soccer stadium. What is that like? But it was great. This summer we went back to concerts, right? Like we did it. We went to baseball games.
I'm very glad I've moved to Queensland about 3 years ago, because we've had about 5 minutes of lockdown. We've been very, very lucky here in Queensland. We've had a few weeks. We had about 6 or 8 weeks to start with. Had another couple of weeks, but they've had to close the border because too many people are trying to move here, so that they had enough space for them. So they shut the border to stop people moving them out here for a while. But then you got Sydney, which has now been a couple of months in lockdown. Melbourne, that's had the longest lockdown in the world, like longer than any other place in the world they've been locked down for, which is just horrible. But it's just so disparate. I mean, my brother lives in LA. He's given me some of the rundown as he's been going through that process over there. It's just, it's really, we've got to go back, as you said, to treating life again as normal, to socialize, to connect, to engage with other people, and
we're
to
lose
not
it.
set that. My kids as well. I've got my kids are 12 and 9, and they've spent like yours 18 months in this environment with all this weird stuff going on, and lack of choice, and having people wearing masks everywhere and all this sort of stuff. And hopefully it goes back to some normality soon, and that they go back to not perceiving that is normal, because
they created this weird rule in New South Wales that kids were allowed to have 2 friends that they can hang out with. And you would think, oh, that's nice, they get to hang out with their friends, but it actually created all of this angst, because all of a sudden every kid had to figure out who their 2 best friends were. Yeah, and when you're 11 years old, right, and you're the third friend, or you're the friend that's being fought over, it created this real tension. And that's this prescriptive humanity is the downside of COVID here. The disease is one thing, but all of these other social impact, it's going to be really. Look, I'm sure those human beings will just figure it out. We'll just plod on, right, and keep going. But for now, it presents some really bizarre challenges.
This has been fun, guys. I appreciate it. What do you guys got going on the rest of the day? I'm going to go home. I got to give my kids a bath because my wife's out to dinner. I got to have some dinner and put these little suckers to bed soon, which is always fun.
It's time to start the day. We started a nice early one today to make sure that it works.
I appreciate it.
For you across the other side of the world.
It's the worst time zones. Eastern time, Aussie time. It is literally 20th, and I appreciate it. Next time I'll do the morning shift. And I tell you guys, I haven't been down there. It's definitely on our list, and hopefully in a couple of years, I don't know if my 3.5-year-old's ready right now to take a 30-hour plane ride. Maybe we have to do a little stop in LA, but we want to get down there and explore.
It's beautiful down here.
You don't want to do that.
Great to show you the sights.
Awesome, Poz. Thanks so much for coming on the show, mate.
Really appreciate it.
And that wraps up another episode of The Few. Thank you to our partners, Afterburner, for team building, development and alignment. We understand now how important it is to have the right people around you. Get them on board with where you want to go. Momentum Media, the largest industry publisher in the country, connecting your business to the Australian community. ICMI, Australia's premier speaker bureau, representing the few that do fulfill their life's purpose. And finally, Sean's Inner Circle, the business coaching organisation for small and medium enterprises looking to make that next step. Thanks again for listening in and downloading today. Please leave a review on whatever platform you are currently listening to this podcast, and reach out to our partners who can help you make the transition to the few.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And to all your listeners, be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check out the podcast, podcast.com, and happy to chat with anybody.
We'll add links in the show notes as well. So awesome. Thanks, Adam.